Good morning. My name is LaShonda, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA DevTest Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I will now turn today's call over to Mr. Chris Krause to begin. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello, everyone. This is Chris Krause with Product Management over on the cool new DevTest applications. And before Christmas, we gave you a couple of cool gifts. We gave you the 12 days of DevTest. You learned about what was new within DevTest 8, formerly known as ITQ Lisa. And we did our initial webinar going over what was new in service virtualization and the API testing. This is part 2, and we're going to go specifically over what's new in continuous application insight. So our agenda is we'll cover what the roadmap items are that we've accomplished and delivered in this release, and then we'll go over some of the new enhancements and give you some demos there. We will do a question and answer at the end, but if you have any questions during the presentations, you can use the chat window or the Q&A window and start them. And our illustrious team of Stefano Muller and Ian Kelly are backing RP and myself up, and they will be answering the questions in line. So to kick off, as you know, we've renamed a lot of the products. So if you think of the classic CA Lisa or ITQ Lisa, we now refer to that as DevTest Solutions. So when we talk about, we would normally say Lisa 8, this is now DevTest Solutions 8. We've renamed Lisa Service Virtualization to CA Service Virtualization. Lisa Test is now CA Application Test. And remember, that's really good for applications and APIs and your mobile testing. So when we say application, it's the big picture. And then Lisa Pathfinder is now Continuous Application Insight. And you'll notice it's got a great new UI and some cool new things in it. So I'm going to start with some of the highlights for Application Insight 8. So we've basically come up with 3 new primary workflows for generating tickets, so how you generate cases where you found defects in the application. This is a strong use for manual testers. New ways to find defects within the application, looking at visualization of the paths, response times, exceptions, and metric data. And then some new DocGen workflows, so enabling you to actually document what's behind the user interface and understand what's behind the application, and that way you can actually generate, say, virtual services and test cases and things like that. We have some new enhancements around the agent. We now allow remote calibration of the agent and remote configuration, which is very nice. There's some new VSC companions. So when you run virtual service models, say for REST or JSON or JMS or MQ series, you can actually capture the requests and the responses that the virtual service supplied into the CAI database, and then you could actually regenerate test cases or replay those transactions against a real system later on when you want to remove the virtual system. And then we've also integrated into Splunk. So if you're keeping data, say request response data or different interesting data about your application in Splunk, what we can do is actually extract that and merge that into your Pathfinder or your CAI database. And then, of course, with every release, we keep enhancing the support matrix itself. So we've upgraded to supporting newer versions of WebSphere and JBoss and WebLogic. We've added the SAP NetWeaver platform, and then we have TIBCO BusinessWorks and the TIBCO Enterprise Message Bus and Web Methods upgraded platforms there. So as you know, with each release, we try to keep up new versions of the supported platforms, sunset old ones, and then expand to new platforms like the NetWeaver. So what I'm going to do now is pass over to RP Jacob. RP is a product manager with myself on CAI, and he's going to go over the initial slides talking about the new asset generation workflows and what's available there, and then I'll return at the end and give you some more demos of the other parts of the product. So RP, go.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, I'm RP. So I will get I'll give you more details about the topics that Chris has covered. So we're really excited about some of the new features, just really focused on giving the users of our products a lot more flexibility of how these assets are generated, and also making these workflows more intuitive. So here's just a list of those items, and I will go into greater details in the slides to come. So we're able to do payload text searching. So this allows you to search for a particular keyword within all the transactions in your database. Also, you're able to merge duplicate transactions, and this allows you to remove the clutter when you're viewing these transactions. The shelf concept lets you take disjointed data sets and combine them into a single virtual service or baseline. So that's also a really exciting concept that we've introduced. And shelf allows you to do composite models, and this is also from multiple agents into a single virtual service.
Hey, RP, your audio is cutting in and out.
Okay, let me take you off my headset. Maybe this will help. Okay, hello? Is that better?
Yeah. Sounds better now, thank you.
Okay, sorry, my headset. Okay, so let's just dive right in. So as you can see that this is our new portal. And as I mentioned, here's the text-based search. So what you're looking at in this box on the right is a list of transactions. Now, although the result says 10, you could have up to 50,000 or more transactions that you have in your database just from a single day or multiple days in a week. So it's really important for you to be able to get to the transaction of interest quickly. So the typical workflow you would follow in this new UI is do a text-based search for something that you may have seen in the web UI as you were interacting with your app, and that would narrow down the list of transactions to what you wanted. You could also do time-based filtering. So if you knew what time of the day that transaction occurred, then you could select down to the last minute or day or month that you're interested in. The refinements on the left-hand side, these operate very similarly to online shopping that you're familiar with. So it's dynamically generated filters or refinements that are generated from the transaction data. So you would see in this particular example, we just all these transactions came from a single agent, but if you had transactions from multiple agents, they would show up here. And you could refine the result set just by selecting various refinements on the left-hand side. So this will allow you to get to the data of interest much more quickly than before. Okay, advance to the next slide. So the merge operation, which is also quite new, so one of the benefits is, let's say I logged in 3 times in a row. I don't want to see all those transactions multiple times. So when I do click on the repeated paths button on the right, it will automatically merge those transactions together. Now, the first benefit is avoiding the duplication. But sometimes I want to be able to coalesce multiple related transactions. For example, I may want to virtualize all the login operations. So if I merge those together, now I can select all the login transactions at once and create a virtual service from it. So it's also a different way of generating assets. So it has dual benefits. Okay. Now, this particular slide is showing you the detailed view of a transaction. So once you find a transaction of interest, you want to get deeper into it and try to understand exactly what happened in the background or on the back end of my application as I've executed an operation on the front end from a web UI. So on the top side, what you see is the path that this transaction has taken. So this is the transaction path. Now, what you're seeing is this white box denotes an agent boundary. This particular transaction only, all the frames are from a single agent, but if you had multiple agents, you would see separate boxes, and that would give you a really quick visual view of how this transaction was processed by the back end. And for each frame within this transaction, you can click on it and look at the request and the response, any log messages that occurred within that transaction frame, if there were exceptions. This UI itself allows you to zoom and pan, so it's a lot of flexibility as to how you can view large transaction paths. And of course, you can export it to a PDF document to share it in email or with your colleagues. Okay. So this is just zooming in on the transaction path a little bit more. Now, when you right-click on a node within the transaction, you can now say shelve this particular frame, which so I've talked about this concept before. The shelving is how you regenerate the transactions. Now, so you can take this particular frame and say shelve it, and once I shelved it, then I can say, what do I want to do with this? Now I want to create a virtual service or a baseline or a documentation. And you can repeat this process of searching for transactions, looking at the details of each frame, shelving those frames until you've collected everything of interest. And then at the end of your workflow, you would say, generate a single asset from it, from the collection of those activities. So you have a lot of flexibility as to what type of asset you create. And this is just giving you a view of what the shelf actually looks like. So in this instance, I've shelved 3 separate transaction frames, and this is just a segue of, you know, once I see that yes, these are indeed the ones that I'm interested in generating assets from, then I would take this to the next level and say, now go ahead and actually create that transaction. So I mentioned before that it does allow for consolidated virtual services and composite models. So we're pretty excited about this feature. Now I'm going to pass it back to Chris, and I look forward to taking your questions. I know some of this may be radically new, so you may need some clarification. Okay. Oh, actually, just one more thing before I pass the ball. So after you created this asset, you want to put this into the DevTest project. And what this web portal allows you to do is do just that. So the workflows have been integrated. So after you create an asset from CAI, or Continuous Application Insight, you no longer have to copy these assets. So it goes directly into the DevTest project, so you can now run this virtual service or baseline directly without missing a beat. All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, RP, you pass me. There we go. Cool. So we've talked about some of the base things within the new CAI, and I have to say I am super excited about all these new things and the fact that it's in a really cool, I was going to say a different word, UI that's all web-based. So one of the new workflows we have is called the DocGen workflow. And one problem we have with modern composite or integrated applications is we don't know what's behind the UI. You don't know what APIs are there, so you don't really know, well, what should I virtualize? What could I test early in the life cycle? Or even better, how can I generate those virtual services automatically, whether they're composite models or regular, or generate those back-end test cases, and then figure out how to validate at the database layer itself. So what we've done is we've added a new workflow called DocGen, which allows you to document your APIs and your interactions behind the user interface. So what I'm going to do is share other application. Ooh, I've got the spinning ball. Ah, there we go. There you go. Cool. So you should be able to see my Firefox browser here. I'm going to log in to the new DevTest portal, admin, to cheat. And what we'll see is I have on my landing page things that tell me about how to get started and use these things, quick links, my virtual services and tests I've run. But here I've got my agents and the status of them. So you can see I've done some fun things to deploy agents across my application. I've got my points of interest, path alerts, and then tickets. I'm going to start with documenting transactions, so the new DocGen workflow. So what we find is people don't have a good understanding of what happens behind the user interface. So think about this. You have thousands of manual tests in Quality Center or maybe Rational or Jira, but do you really want to get them documented as to what the architecture is behind them and then start generating automated test cases or API tests behind them? So this allows you that visibility. So what I'm going to do is start a recording. My machine is 4127, so that's where my browser is, where I'm going to start manually manipulating my application. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just call this VIN. So I'm going to start looking for VINs in my inventory system. Start my recording. So I get visual representation I'm starting. I'm going to come over to my cars application. I'm going to do an inventory search. So that's cool. Got some cars. And I'm going to go do a VIN lookup. So I was able to, from the user interface, walk through the application and get to a VIN. But I don't really know what was happening behind the scenes. But with CAI, what will happen is we're collecting that data, and then there's some different coalescing that happens, and now I can see what's happened. I can see that we went to a history report that went from the car web to the message bus. The message bus then processed and looked for some different VIN codes with web services. Right? I can understand what's actually happening in the application itself. Okay? So there's two things I can do with this information. I'm going to stop my recording. So I basically kind of showed what's behind the scenes. I can create a document, which means I want to say create a PDF and go attach this into Quality Center so that whenever someone has a question, well, what does it take to run the VIN report? What does it take to do this type of application? Well, what will happen is they'll have a history of the web pages that were hit, the request responses. They'll understand the agents and the app servers that were being used, and all the details of the Java virtual machines. If it was running in WebSphere, WebLogic, TIBCO, things like that. So it's a lot of copious details, but the advantage is we don't have documentation of these things, so having all these copious details is actually really important. Okay? So when I look at the UI itself, if I drill into here, what I can see is those agent boundaries that RP talked about. The web page actually hits the message bus to do the VIN inventory search, right? So what we see is there's actually not a database here. There's a web service to a third-party system to go get that data. Well, now that I have this visibility, I could go virtualize this quite easily. I have understanding of what's behind the user interface. Maybe I want to create a baseline to test that VIN service without driving the UI to do it. Maybe I want to actually drive these JSON calls into the system without having to go across all the systems themselves. So I've got a lot of visibility into what's happening, and I can understand how to better test and how to document my systems. So what I'll do is I'll save this off, and now what happens is I have a list of all my recordings. So I've done this for listing of users in the bank, my inventory system, my VIN system. I can now actually create a link to this and share this link. So I could put it in Quality Center. So if someone ran that manual test case in Quality Center and said, wow, it doesn't work, but I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, they can just click the link and come directly to these pages itself. So really cool things going on. Okay, so that's what the DocGen is for and what it's going to give you. So now let's look at another new workflow, Find Defects Workflow. So one of our problems is our applications are highly distributed. I mean, who knew that we actually had 2 app servers behind just a simple VIN lookup? We need to understand what's happening in the application itself. So we know that your applications have log4j messages. They have exceptions. You have response times for different components. So what we've done is we wanted to figure out a way to visualize that and annotate that data to make it easier to drive into your application and figure out what's going on. Okay? And then once you find something interesting, you can drop a pin like on a map and identify it and then consider that a point of interest to look at later. And then you could also generate the assets around it, say if it's for something you find problematic or you want to recreate locally on your desktop itself. So what the annotations are is our ability to color and show you what's happening behind the scenes based on the data we observed in the agents. And then you can drop a pin to say this is something interesting. I can maybe pass it to RP or Jenny to say, hey, go look at this. I don't understand what's going on. And then I can actually create the assets to replay that defect itself. So I'm going to come back over to my browser. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to close these defects, come back to the home page, and then one thing that I've always had problems with is figuring out where all these log messages happen. Okay? So a lot of times when something goes wrong in the application, well, you end up with this giant log file, which could be megabytes long. And you have things like, account does not get discount, view activity service successful, right? Well, it's really hard to know what data caused this happen, or if it's an exception, an error message, what the code was that did it, other than the user control being, what was the information around it itself. So RP mentioned earlier that we've added text searching or full text searching to CAI. So what this means is I can come over to my Explore Defects, instead of saying, wow, I've got a whole bunch of frames within the last day. So I've got 100 frames over here. I don't want to go through these individually and try to figure out where my defects are, my logs are. What I'm going to simply do is put count does not. I'll just put part of the search in there. And what I'm going to do is going to narrow down my frames to figure out who had that error message. Well, that's cool. I know it's in one of these 2 frames. Well, now I'm going to go use the annotation framework and say, okay, actually show me exceptions and log messages. So if I'm interested in what instance of the bean had the log message, account does not get discount, I found that in amazing time. I guarantee you this is going to be the fastest way to find a correlation between a message and a 50 meg log file, or maybe a 500 gig log file, and the actual running application to figure out what's going on. I mean, this is a dramatic change in your workflow for the better. I mean, how many times are like, all right, how do I figure out how to recreate this? What's the data associated with it? What was this database table? What was the data that was returned? All that great information is now available to figure out why that logic tripped this way. Okay, so the annotations highlight things so we can see the data. We can see exceptions that occurred. Cool. How cool is that? You gotta love demo applications have pre-built exceptions in them. Yay! And our log messages. So we attach to the log4j information. Now, quite honestly, if you're running this against a Lisa Bank like I did, you'll notice I actually went down to the info level messages because your default messages we're going to capture are like errors and warnings. We're not going to go this level. So you're going to try this yourself. Go to your agents and configure them to a much lower log level. Okay, so for example, info. Okay, so well, that's really interesting. Now I've seen that within these transactions, account does not. This specific transaction, I've got some error messages here. Now, I talked about this whole right-click thing. So if I do a right-click here, oops, I can actually go through and do pin drops and different things. So I've got the web service that called the EJB. So if I'm interested in this, I may drop a pin and say WS for account not no discount. So it makes it really easy for someone else to find this. Okay. The other thing is maybe I want to make sure that I can recreate this transaction locally without having to set up my databases and all the other things. So I could actually go through and I could right-click on, oops, sorry, double-clicked. So I could actually right-click in and do something like create a all the artifacts around that. What this means is I need the GIND connection into the EJB and then the dependent database and virtual services for the EJBs that it relies on, or I could do it at the web service level. We call this a one-click because basically we're saying for this very specific transaction, I want to automatically generate the baseline tests that Lisa application tests will use to call this, and I want to generate the virtual services for all the dependencies to this. Okay? And when I click generate, the cool thing is I can get it done very quickly. Demo 1, create. So it was a one-click generation, and I've now placed those into my system. And I get successful generation of both of those. So the idea is now I have assets in my demo project that give me the ability to replay the right data and the right input to cause this defect again. So I can go figure out how to solve it itself. Okay? I'm going to come up here and remove these. So let's come back to dealing with lots of transactions themselves. So I've got 100 transactions. I've got 1 days of data. Now, when I do, say, show exceptions and logs, notice I've still got 100. I have this thing called show only annotated transactions. So now I can limit and only see people that have exceptions in them that way. Maybe I want to see who's got poor response times. So I'm interested in, say, figuring out what are the slow running activities themselves. So maybe who's at like the 95th percentile for response times. Notice as I clicked up, I dynamically adjusted my query. So I can now see my slow services. Oh, wow. So this response time is at the 100th percentile on this message bus. So from a developer standpoint, if I'm interested in what's going very poorly, I can actually identify those very quickly and maybe solve these problems before I get into load and performance testing. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my PowerPoint, and I'm going to give dirty stares to people across the cubes if you heard lots of background noise. Okay, ticket generation. So we formally call this cases. So what we found is that many times we run into an OODA loop between developers and QA, or sometimes it's product managers and developers. We're saying, it doesn't work on my machine, and then Rich and Jenny and those guys say, works on my machine, it must be environmental issues. Like, no, it doesn't work on my machine. And sometimes it's environmental, sometimes it's I'm doing something different from what they expected to create the bug itself. So it really is hard to debug those things unless you understand how you got the system into the state and how you got the system the way it is. So what we've done is we've created abilities with the agents to capture the transaction state and then actually go from there. Now, we do have interactions with quality centers. So if you say create the defect here in CAI, we can actually go push it into QC to show there's and log the defect there. And we use the VAPI interface for it. I'm sorry, we dropped the VAPI interface and we just use a RESTful interface for that. So I'm going to come back to my browser. Okay, so what happens is many times people are walking through their applications. They're running a test. Let's say I'm Chris 100. And, okay, I come into my system and I start running my test case. It looks like there's a bug there. The phone number should be 1212. Let me make sure my edit panel works. Change that to 1212, modify my user. I'm going to go add an account to the system. And looks like I got my new account. I have $100,000. You got to send that message to the universe. And then we come back. We'll make a withdrawal from the system. And I'll withdraw. And according to my test case, since this is a new account and I paid my first bill, I should have gotten a $5 discount on the system itself, but it doesn't show up. So this is one of those cases where I know something's gone wrong. I know there's a lot of things in the background, but I can't pinpoint it. So say I was passing this over to one of my favorite developers, like Fong or Jenny, they'd be like, yeah, right, good luck. You got a screenshot. Are you sure your system's set up right? I can't reproduce it. It works perfectly on my machine. So to stop that back and forth OODA loop, all I'm going to do is an Alt-click and say allow my applet to go and create ticket. And I'm going to say here's my ticket. So this is going to be new account balance, Jira 123, make it high. And submit it. So what happens is behind the scenes, we've looked at what was the session, what did you do in the browser to get to this point to actually create this. So I can view it here. I'll close this and come over to the CAI console. And if I refresh, use the little wheel in the upper right-hand corner, I can see there's a new defect I put in today, new account balance. There's one from yesterday. Not that I test, but yeah, you know, got to make sure your demo works, right? So if I look at this with the new account balance, I can see when it's done, well, what I want to do is actually look at the path. So what happened up to create this and bring it to this state? Well, so there were some transactions, there was a deposit of money, walk backwards, there's a button click. We looked at some transactions. We created the account. So at any point in time, I can actually click into here, and I can see details about the request, and I can see the response that came back. So I can see the data associated with all these calls. So from a testing perspective and root cause analysis, this is amazing because it lets me see how I got to a state. Modify user. Let's go look in there. So I can see there's my user in the system, and I can see there's Chris Kraus. New flag is true. He's a regular user, so that's good. So the new flag means that he should get the account discount. Let's drill into this. Looks like there's some updates done. Yep. Got into the system. Oh. Hold on, there's a problem here. This says false. So it looks like between updating of the user and the system, the new customer flag got reset. So there's a bug right here that needs to be worked with. So this is the kind of data I need to give to developers to figure out what's going on if I'm like really interested in my data, or it's going to be the data a developer is going to figure out on his own. So if you think about it, none of this statuses and this data from the database was actually visualized in my application UI. It's all in the background. I did a right click, dropped my pin drop, so I've identified, okay, here's my problem, and said this is the exact bean. And so I can actually come over here and I can see that, or I can edit the ticket. I can say it's in the identified status, and I can put a note in here. If I could type, so it looks like the logic is correct to not give the discount, but it's because a different part of the code actually caused the flag to be reset. So I'm going to go and identify that, and then I could take and get a link to this. So there's actually a link I could share. So this link I could give to someone like a developer or a partner and say, okay, here's a link to this exact bug, so they don't have to come into the UI and find it here. Okay, so the managed tickets or cases fundamentally hasn't changed, but you'll notice we have a much nicer user interface. We do have more statuses where you can see show me defects within a certain amount of time and filter on different things. You can look for a specific transaction ID, but you will see them as they update into ARM console. So if I update my home page here, which you'll see I have one new and one identified. So things go through the workflow, will come off over here. So these are all the new ones. The one I have is now in the identified panel. Okay, so we'll go back to our PowerPoints and see what's next.
So that's the process to replace.
Okay. So we've managed our ticket list, seen the details, and gone through and identified the paths. Okay, so those are kind of the core new things within service virtualization itself. So sorry, Freudian slip from being the product manager for SE. For the continuous application insight, now that we've renamed the product. So we'll go on and open it for questions. LaShonda, do you want to give instructions again for asking audio questions?
At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. As a reminder, to ask an audio question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad.
Okay. Well, we may not have a lot of questions today. Everybody's rolling in from the new year. Okay. So I have a question. What does it mean when you say you support NetWeaver? Okay. So the good thing about SAP is there's a lot of stuff there. The bad thing about SAP is there's a lot of stuff there. So when we say NetWeaver, SAP's traditional application called R3 ran an ABOP on the proprietary platform. And then when they started going SOA, they added something called XI, the XML interface, and PI, Process Integrator, and then they've renamed that to NetWeaver 7.4 Process Orchestrator. That is a Java J2EE platform, and what it does is it takes in data from, say, web service calls. It hosts web pages. If you're familiar with the CA support site, you'll notice NetWeaver actually powers that. So it is a J2EE server to us, and we've taught our Lisa agents how to sit in there and understand paths. So we can see the web services, RESTful services, database calls, and things like that. So it's pretty cool what we've done with that. Okay, there's a question about the demo apps. So the demo apps, the two things I used here is I used the Lisa Bank, and then I used the Lisa, or the Forward Cars, formerly known as Lisa Cars. And Forward Cars is a beginning of a application we're writing that has lots of agents in it and different app servers itself. So if you're within CA, you can get access to them through the demos on demand and the DoD. And what happens is you can activate the agents against that. Okay, any other questions? I don't think so.
And there are no audio questions at this time.
Okay. Cool. So if everybody remembers, we're the New Year's kicking off, we ended with the 12 days of DevTest, and we've already started some of our first blogs. We've introduced something new to show you, kind of link all of our tips and tricks from the experts. So if you go into the communities, you'll see I did a blog post yesterday of how to use MySQL with Lisa, because when you go into DevTest 8, you'll notice when you're running the default Darby database, it'll warn that it's not for production use and it's not fast enough to do other things with. So what I did is I gave a cookbook of how to install MySQL and get the jars for the JVC driver in the right spot and quickly configure it, like set up the database tables and users and that. So we're starting a new thing for the year where product management, or say technical pre-sales and post-sales, is going to post in tips and tricks. And that way we'll get them grouped with a specific hashtag. Stefan, it's Ask the Expert?
Tips from CA. Sorry, Chris, I was on mute.
CA. Sorry.
Yeah, so if you go into our community, you use the search function on the right side of the screen and write the single word tips from CA, you're going to get a whole listing of items that we've designated as tips that we're producing for you. I also put the link to the cookbook up in the chat screen, so you'll see it there. You can see Chris's cookbook, how to download 8.0, some of the licensing tips that we're providing for 8.0. We're going to be continuing to tag things with tips from CA so that you know that they're endorsed by our team as best practices or tips.
Cool. So if there's no other audio questions, we'll go and give everybody 15 minutes back. Thank you for your time. Hopefully you're excited about running the new CA Continuous Application Insight with your applications, building assets, building virtual services, documenting your manual workflows, and then of course finding defects in your application earlier on in the life cycle. And I really think having full text search is a huge help when it comes to looking for log messages that showed up in a 50 meg file and correlating it back to the actual instance of a piece of Java code that caused it. So really cool new stuff. Of course, one last plug for the communities. Remember, the ideas is out there. So if you saw something here and you're like, wow, I wish it did X or Y or Z, put it into the ideas so it gets voted up. And then we'll work with Rich and the team to get that put into the product itself. So at this point, we can end the call. LaShondra.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.